beginning. His first consciousness was an immense nostalgia, an awareness of passage. The universe is running down, always in the direction of increasing entropy. The brutality of the word tumeur. Be careful, here is intelligence at work. Self-hatred, masochism. He spoke of the dog as dominant. It would be necessary to give a full account of the present state of the public taste in this country and to determine how far this taste is healthy or depraved, which again could not be determined without pointing out in what manner language and the human mind act and react on each other, and without retracing the revolutions, not of literature alone, but likewise of society itself. What of all these voices? The language poet orders tongue. How can we look to words? How can we look, the two of us, stranded, touching, telling? I'm just beginning to reach the point where what you're objecting to in my poem is not its style, but thought itself, its shifts, its evasions, its magical ability to function in many contexts at once. It was the rock star, nerves jangling, veins open. Who could tell him anything? The newspaper, which had been folded over flat on the ground yesterday, is now wide open. The wind reads it. To say that a poem is about self-consciousness is not to say that it is only about self-consciousness. There may be poems which are only about poetry, and maybe Blank wrote some of them, but if so, that is an extremely limited conception of poetry. Self-consciousness is by its very nature expansive, passionate, interested, anxious to discover resonances of itself at large in the world. This desperate, obsessive need to talk. I walked through the house alone this morning. Song, dry island, embattled sky, voices of the sea, strange flowering. To tell you the truth, I enjoyed chasing after you. Perhaps we could do it a couple of times a month. Passing by, her hands in her pockets. What are your hands doing? To be one, to be only, to be lone. There was an electronic tuning test at the Bell System exhibit in Disneyland. By pressing buttons, you could hear either a tone of fixed frequency or a tone whose frequency you could adjust, but not both at the same time. After you had matched the frequencies as closely as possible, the machine scored your performance. My wife, who was a musician, did much better than I.
I sit in the car in the exact middle of the front seat. I hear the announcer's voice as a compact sound source, dead ahead, midway between the two speakers. As I move to the right, the sound source at first becomes diffuse. As I move further right, all the sound clearly comes from the right-hand speaker.
I have said that if a sound reaches us with equal intensities from two sources, we hear all of it as coming from the nearer source. If the difference in distance is about a foot or greater, to dabble here, to wander.
I before E except after C, tested by the word atheist.
Like cutting a path through the jungle.
With a bureaucrat.
Tempête dans un bénitier, le souverain pontife avec les archevêques du fond de Satan et chantier.
They don't know what they're losing, all these wretched priests.
Sans le latin, la messe nous emmerde.
Gins of frequency or intensity.
Se change en eau de bouteille.
Changes into black pudding water.
The precedence effect, the fact that a sound seems to come from the direction from which it reaches us first, is bad for stereo, but highly desirable in everyday life. When someone speaks to you in a hard-walled room, you hear all the sound is coming from his or her mouth, even though much of the sound that reaches you has been reflected from the walls.
The power over me is, what is the word, silence?
Whistles arrow from whirlwind.
Rain through his heart.
Say what I'm called, and who rouses and calms my power. It is characteristic of the mass media that the figures in them are all absent, not there, can't be touched. This is also true of books, which were in a sense the first of the mass media. Speaking to G.P. Scratz, I extended this idea to the Catholic Mass as well. The Mass is still another mass medium, an attempt to reach as many people as possible. At the beginning of the Mass, Christ is and remains profoundly absent, has not returned, and the Mass is precisely a fictional assertion that this is not the case, that Christ is in fact present. Faith equals the evidence of things not seen, the substance of things hoped for. Fiction!
The possibility that her disastrous relationships with men arise out of the desire to prove her mother right. Men are such beasts.
Too bad you didn't come with us to the restaurant. We found it with a little trouble, and had just been seated when suddenly in pops Ishmael and Callahan and Alta and everybody. So we all sat down together and ate too much Italian food and had a very nice time.
Or crazy birds.
These crows who saw cut
The
slice
sound and good old ground.
of the cross where they have perched.
The name Kohan still has magic. The mere mention of it was enough to unleash a stream of talk from the two of them.
Allied with leaves,
It might have been
soft-spoken.
dogs, it might have
Bend
been
all
fox,
your
it might have
bows,
been
said
sure
Robin
the school
Hood.
of
This
hard
day at the
knowledge.
kirk of
I detest
Gamry,
grandfather
a sudden
Fox,
spasm,
the
monstrous
shivers
wings,
that
can't
never
walk,
crossing
can't
her
talk,
leotard, she
furioso,
jumped her socks,
spasm,
squinting
evil
her
is
eyes,
everywhere to be
like a
seen.
pump.
There is no
Ignoring
rest
my
from it.
comment
The
on
power
angels
of death
and love.
multiplies. There is
Whispered
no
of weakness,
life. And just when I might have reproached
We sat in the
myself, it was
coffee house,
Lucien's
breathing
thoughts,
the
her
air,
mental
casual
attitudes, the
observer
plenitude of her being which I
Came
encountered.
sprinkling
Not one of my
over
kisses
there,
went
and
astray,
fixing upon
but
me
strange
her
from
vacuous
that.
stare,
Much can be
assuming
said
an attitude
differently.
born of
All
despair.
these
She
are
fell
promises
over
made at a
gracefully,
certain
fell from her
time,
chair.
yet broken to
Glamour
love,
they tell me
which
was down
stands
to her
wavering in a
and
doorway,
whispered
speaking
obliquely,
words I can
subject
neither
was
hear
lost.
nor
Now
love.
that
You are
I'm older,
endless,
very
sorrowful,
well read, and
everything
often
in
occurs
nature
when I'm
became
going to
fragmented
bed. But I
before
wonder
him.
what
Geheim, geheim, good brother John,
Voice
and
that
tell your
rises
sister
awake in the
Sarah,
bed.
she found him drowned in Yarrow. Ah, yours, man, to think of this again. Think, 40 years ago, there, my face in the mirror, the hermeneutical situation, for the letter killeth, but the spirit, the breath, as the wind turns them leaves, they seem to say goodbye. Soil, bridge, stone, old Ireland is calling. Thousands of Madrid residents protested President Reagan's visit to Spain last night by banging on pots and pans and turning off their house lights. I tied my drum to the top of my lance. Farewell, farewell, my sweet mind. Goodbye, love, dark one, daughter, endlessly, blonde, dark, fair, sweet, bitter, mild, soft, harsh, fiery. Articulation of sound.
Memory in the ear
A substitution
of the audible
for the visible.
to write this day
To insist.
upon it.
Correspond.